What's up, Trash Talkers? Here at Veteran Trash Talk, we actually vet our sponsors. We don't just take their money and run like a Butterbar lieutenant lost on the land nav course. Are you finally ready to plant your flag and claim your territory? Maybe it's time to use that VA loan to buy a home. Or hell, maybe you're looking to refinance and put some extra cash in your pocket for more questionable life decisions. Either way, the Veterans Mortgage Source, powered by Canopy Mortgage, has your six. Look, buying a home or refinancing can feel like getting overrun on a bad op. Chaotic, confusing, and full of obstacles that make no damn sense. That's where Corey and his team come in. They're like the QRF of home loans, ready to pull you out of the chaos and guide you to the best program for you. And trust me, they'll answer all your questions. Yeah, even the dumb ones. Whether you're a salty vet or fresh out of barracks still trying to figure out where your TA-50 went. Great service, solid rates, and a team that actually understands the military life. That's why all of us here at Veteran Trash Talk trust them to do right by every veteran and their family. Ready to lock it in? Give Corey a call or shoot him a text at 808-699-7874. That's 808-699-7874. Don't wait. Unless you like overpaying and getting treated like an FNG. The Veterans Mortgage Source is powered by Canopy Mortgage, LLC. All loans are subject to credit and property approval.
All right, I think it's working. Okay, so couple technical difficulties. My battle buddy is traveling right now, right? He's heading on his way to Washington, D.C. So this will be a little bit quicker show. We had to skip it last week. The reason being is because it was a super fluid situation. And here on Talk Monkey, what we don't want to do is be reactionary, right? Like ultimately, while the 24-hour news cycle drives a lot of the world, it doesn't really give you a lot of time to be able to pause and actually like put any analysis into it. And so as most of you know, right now I'm going to cover, if you're new here, please go to TOCMONKEY.com. And you can follow along with some of the things I'm going to say, but I do anticipate a little bit shorter show today because I don't have my friend to basically counter everything that I say. Right. So with that being said, just a little bit, it's been a good week. If you could tell, I got my, the Veterans Forum of North Carolina hat on. We've been advocating for them all week up in the Capitol in Raleigh. And Nick is on his way to DC right now to advocate for programs that actually get at the problem of veteran suicide, which is the Veteran Trash Talk mission, right? And so I want y'all to keep that in mind, right? Like, again, as spoken in the pre-ad, like we vet the sponsors to this program. And all VTT programs, and right, and so it needs to be veteran based, and our core mission is really suicide prevention and awareness, and helping us, reduce the impact of that it has on the veteran population and the force at large. Okay, with that being said, it has been an insane week and in 2 weeks, right, since the last that we talked, covering everything that's happened in the world. As we introduced 2 weeks ago, I'm gonna go by COCOM for those that are uninitiated, right? The Department of War, Department of Defense, or whatever you want to call it. We split the world up into sections, and we call those combatant commands, right? And so I'm gonna go through each of the major ones. There's been major developments specifically in really in all of them, to be honest with you. But we're gonna key in on a couple. I'm gonna give you the context for what that is, and then obviously we're going to talk about the late breaking news with what's going on in Iran, and then in UCOM with Ukraine and Russia. There will be no axis of the idiots this week because honestly, there's too many of them. Right, there's a lot of bad actors floating around the world right now, and they all kind of got highlighted. And I don't want to be reactionary and give y'all bad content just because there's some artificial deadline that I set on myself to produce a segment. But we're definitely going to talk about some key players, and I'll just say it, nominate some people from our future access of idiots. So without further ado, by COCOM. Again, combatant commands established by the Department of War, the Department of Defense. Starting with AFRICOM, we've talked a lot about Sudan on this show, right? And it's still becoming an active player. And we saw that even more because of some of the Red Sea things that are taking place. But the RSF, right? If you remember our axis of idiot number one, Humidity, his brother got sanctioned again, right? And is now being looked at by the UN as a war criminal. And so while they got kicked out of, let me make sure I don't get it right. Right, there was North Kordofan. Sorry, they hit a mosque and a military hospital. 22 killed. In the village of Kadugli stays besieged. What that really means for us, right, is that we still have this active Cold War going on between the UAE and Saudi Arabia, who find themselves on opposite sides of this conflict, as we've spoken before. Absolutely. About Red Sea ports, right? And so China and Saudi Arabia have that. And so their side has that currently on the ports. They own the port of Sudan. So that's Saudi Arabia and China. And the RSF is constantly trying to struggle to gain those back. And CENTCOM, right? And we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but obviously the MOU was signed by both Iran and the United States. President Trump signed it at Versailles, which has a lot of meaning behind it, right? Like we have several renowned treaties have been signed at Versailles. No different here, right? Moving on, and we'll get back to that one. Ukraine, right, landed its largest ever drone strike, and they actually struck Moscow in the last 48 hours extensively, blowing up, significant oil refineries and a persistent kind of drone barrage. They also, at the beginning of the economic conference that they had last week in St. Petersburg, they had struck the oil refinery and energy infrastructure there, right? So Ukraine showing its reach. We'll follow that later in the show. And Indo-PACOM, China's law enforcement pressure east of Taiwan is really just, it's single source right now. We'll see more if this develops, but essentially we're seeing uptick in patrols by China around the Taiwan Strait in response to some things that Japan is doing. But ultimately just signaling that you can see these as test, just China testing the West, right, to see where our attention's really at. So they are in a more aggressive posture than normal. And Southcom, if you saw back a couple weeks with JSOC and a couple other task forces, right, El Menchino, who was part of the, CJNG cartel boss, was killed, right? And then his second man was killed, but nothing. So a significant thing to keep an eye on, especially as we talked about a couple weeks ago, the drone, the importance of counter UAS policy on the border, and acknowledging that there's some Fourth Amendment concerns there. But ultimately, we have seen 324 cartel attacks in June alone, right? And so that goes on cartel violence and/or cartel on Mexican army violence or federal police violence. So there is absolutely a struggle for power inside of the cartel worlds. And so it's something to keep an eye on to see how that spills over, right? Still, we have an aggressive posture on the southern border with the task forces that we have there, but something to just keep a look at. And then Northcom, it made the news. Interesting story, right? At first, it looked like the FBI was the primary one that spoiled what was going to be an attack on the UFC fight. So there was a cell, upwards of 25 members that had planned a massive kind of combined arms on, if you will, of drone attack with HE explosives on the crowd, followed on by some direct fire. Now, there's reports of up to between 5 and 10 that have been arrested. But the reporting was that the cell is as large as 25. And then we saw some weird, and again, take it with a grain of salt, and this is kind of inter service fighting that's going on. But the Secret Service came out with the field office report that this was theirs, right? And that there's allegations that the FBI director pulled the gun too quick to go public because they didn't have everybody that they wanted yet, which is unfortunate. You hate to see that kind of reporting spill out, but ultimately, what I think the biggest takeaway is one is that everybody was safe, the attack was spoiled, and that I trust that our Leos are going to find the rest of these guys. Right? Apparently, it doesn't look like it was foreign influence. That this was probably homegrown, and if it's homegrown, my concerns of them having like exit plans or whatnot, getting out, dramatically decreased. Right? What you probably have is under 40 age males running for their lives right now and trying to avoid the police. But I have faith in our law enforcement that they'll be able to locate these individuals and bring them to justice. Absolutely despicable plot from all accounts that's been taken. Now, how serious were they? Where were they at in the planning process? Honestly, I personally don't care. If you have these idolations of attacking civilians in any way, shape, or form, like you deserve the full force of our law enforcement brunt. So that's your COCOM update brief. Followed on by major sports, right? Hurricanes won Stanley Cup. The New York Knicks won the NBA Finals, and then we just started the opening round of the U.S. Open. So those are kind of like the three things that I'm personally watching. Love U.S. Open weekend. Be excited to see who obviously an extremely difficult golf course that they're playing up there, and so we'll see how that shakes out as well. So that wraps up your top down. Now, a little bit of a rant here, right? I personally do not like cable news. Now, I don't mean that to disrupt anybody or offend anyone. I do watch it, right? But I typically flip through kind of a rotation of channels, and I mostly do it just to see where the messaging's at. And this isn't like news to anybody. If you watch MS Now, you're getting like a progressive left wing kind of impact. CNN's kind of in this weird space where obviously I would argue they're center of left or left of center, I should say. But they've at least have panels that have opposing viewpoints on them. And then on the other side of that, obviously Fox News, which has been obviously critical of the POTUS on certain shows and not on others. And then you go News Nation and just so on down the line, right? So I try to take about 10 minutes out of my day and just, especially at the breaking news hours, I don't really watch talking heads. You're not just for whatever reason. Like I'm not watching Rachel Maddow, just like I'm not watching Sean Hannity. I don't mean any offense to anybody like that, but personally, I don't really gain anything from that. But if you watch like the midday, if you catch like 10 minutes, you can get a feel for where the mainstream media is reporting. And over the last, week, right, the in CENTCOM in response to the Iran. We're going to tackle Iran first, and then I'll get to Ukraine. What we saw was essentially, how would I say this? What you have is if one side is doing a victory lap, like this is the greatest thing that's ever happened, and immediately give the Nobel Peace Prize to the POTUS. The other side is saying that this is an American loss. I want to hear you, or want y'all to understand. I'm not here to say either of those things. What I'm here to say is I'm glad that we've reached a new phase of this operation, because I think it does any of us no good, right? Like history's going to write the story of this, right? And it's not happening right now. Now there's a lot of influence and pressure on the American public to be like, well, why did we do this? Well, guys, like, you know, y'all heard the saying, spilt milk. It happened, right? We're here now. And so now our strategic interests have to almost kind of reset, because I would argue, and I think most objective people would argue, we didn't necessarily set out and we didn't accomplish necessarily what we, you know, the stated purpose of this was. The Iranian regime is still in charge, even arguably more hardline than it was before. However, we're here now, right? And so I will give credit to the POTUS for being pragmatic enough to kind of cut sling load, and not double down in this sense. And so he has started the conversation. But I think anybody that tells you that knows where this conversation going is being foolhardy. So I don't really have an opinion on the MOU as it stands, right? It didn't say much, right? And it's a memorandum of understanding. So it was a framework at its core, right? I mean, I'm sure you've seen it in open source reporting. And you can see it on multiple websites, and I think the White House even has it published right now. But the main two factors were that the strait will reopen. So great, we'll get a little bit of relief, right, at the gas pump. The infrastructure is still there, and there's still the backlog, and it's still a worldwide market, and all those things. So yes, the prices will drop. I do not expect them to drop like dramatically, to the point, but they'll give you some breathing room, right? As Nick has said numerous times on the show, we're still going to go to the pump and pay it, right? Farmers are still going to be out there pumping diesel into the fields. And so therefore it's just something that we will ebb and flow with. Um, and now we have to deal with the economic realities of what took place. And then also there's going to be an understanding and an economic shift of what happened. So anybody that comes forward and says that they know economically what's going to happen here, I immediately have questions for that I would argue they can't answer, right? Because we just don't know. So if me and Nick talked about it in, I think, week 2, right? We have reshifted how the Middle East does business. The jury's out on if that's going to be good or bad or not, right? So in this segment, what I really want to talk about, having said that, and not looking backwards, looking forwards, a constant theme here has been to try to break the mold of that when we say the Middle East, and we've heard it out of some administrative talking points, that the Arab countries or the Gulf region, right, that they are monolithic in the way that they look at the world. And I just fundamentally disagree with that outlook. So what I tried to do this week, and what I tried to prepare for, is to kind of go by country and pick winners and losers of this conflict, right? And if you understand who the winners or losers are, I believe it would help you anticipate where they're looking to go next and what their issues are, right? And what their strategic aims are. Because as we've discussed at length, the UAE and the Saudi Arabian outlooks are completely different, right? They're in a proxy war in the middle of Sudan. And right now, right, we're seeing the UAE be extremely hawkish towards Iran because they took the brunt of it, right? And I think it's important for everybody to understand why they are that way, right? And so to do that, right, I'm just going to kind of go by country, right? Iran, right? The regime survived, which is critical, right, for them. And then we have the IRGC essentially consolidating power, right? And so what wasn't in MOI was really they attested to what they already talked about in the previous treaty, which is that, hey, we're not going to ever pursue a nuclear weapon. That's worth the sheet of paper it's written on, right? Iran has been saying that for a long time. I think that most reasonable objective analyst will tell you that they will always try to find an angle to get a nuclear weapon, and that it is critical, because now even more so they see it as a leverage to prevent like an existential threat. Saudi Arabia has kind of rallied around and looking for, they're in that battle right now with the UAE of who's going to control this policy. They're completely fine with this MOU, right? They're supportive of it. They absolutely don't want any more death blossom shots, right? And this gives them the leverage. What we talked about, they wanted to wait and play it out, right? The Red Sea and the Houthis now, in theory, not being able to be funded, right, by Iran, allows them to be able to get their stuff out the Red Sea and continue to leverage on that. Oman and Qatar, rising kind of powers here, right? Oman has positioned itself to be able to work with Iran on the strait, but that kind of got held off, right? So this 60 days will be critical to see what really the verbiage changed from when there's going to be a toll, right? There was a toll, and now there's going to be an environmental tax. That'll be critical as an indicator to watch. Qatar is in a unique position because they have a lot of friendly relationships, right, with Iran, and they hold a lot of Iranian money. We saw some open source reporting this week that they are already postured to release a lot of Iranian funds back to Iran. So Iran will continue to leverage that. That is an absolute thorn in the side of Saudi Arabia. And now I would expect that the UAE, who I'm going to talk about a little bit more here in a second, is absolutely going to leverage. Actually, I'll do it now. So it bothers me with the policy, right? When you think about the UAE, you have an organization or a country. It's really just a business, right? It is a country and has a hierarchy, but it's more so I look at it as an incorporation that backed Assad, right? Who was backed by Iran as well. And people, it's hard to reconcile, right? But really what the UAE is against is Islamic political leadership, right? Which is absolutely what Iran, right? But they backed Assad because Assad was putting down radical Islamists, right? So the UAE remains this unique character in this, right? And so then moving on, Iran is going to continue to do what it does. While it's lost Syria, it's lost Hezbollah's in problems. The Houthis are kind of exposed, right? And so their last stronghold is Iraq, right? And that might cause a little bit of surprise. But Iraq now is, and this is my major indicator, Iraq is absolutely now one of the most critical foreign policy focuses we have to have. And the reason is because a third of that country is ran by Shia militia aligned politicians, right? And so on the back end of that, right, there is a draw out date for us that's supposed to come this fall, which I don't think a lot of people are expecting to happen because we've drawn down so significantly. But we're sitting up in Erbil, right, and we're providing support to the Kurds, so we still have a presence in Baghdad and in Erbil, and that presence allows for Shia militias to still operate and be part of the revolution, right, or be part of like get these Western forces out of here. So there's a law going forth right now inside of Iraq, right, that essentially says that the PMF, and so the Popular Mobilization Force, for those that are familiar, that was a Shia militia that we fought all the way from 06 and then going all the way forward. They changed a lot of names, but essentially it's the same force that then helped counter ISIS, right? The problem with them is that they need us there to justify their existence, right? They were brought in to the kind of Iraqi army. Think of them as like the National Guard, if that helps you conceptualize it. But they're militias, right? And they're absolutely beholden not to the Iraqi government, even though they have a relationship with them. What they really are beholden to is to the clerics, right? And so what we've seen though is that this law came in to absorb them even more, right? But then organizations like AAH and KH, which my GWAT guys will understand, these are the guys we fought, right, throughout the surge years in Iraq that are now essentially uniformed forces for the Iraqi army. They're kind of holding out, right, because they don't want, if the West leaves, then what's their reason to exist? Well, there's a simultaneous effort that we do not know the answer to yet to see what Iran does with its Iranian proxies inside of Iraq, right? And does Iraq become more of a proxy state over the next year? Now, Secretary Rubio and the Secretary of State's office have been pretty hot on this and sanctioned some key militia leaders. Not reported widespread in Western military in the Western media, but when this war kicked off, we were absolutely doing airstrikes inside of Iraq on Iranian militia facilities, which made a lot of us GWAT veterans extremely happy because these are the guys that killed a lot of our friends, right? So there's this dynamic, though. Think about it as a political party inside of Iraq that is absolutely funded, taken care of, and armed by Iran and has been for decades, right? They're active inside the political space, right? And so if as this shakes out, as the Iraqi government, at least the part that's not compromised by Iran, tries to roll in what I would say is you know, the Shia militia factions that are Iranian sympathetic, what happens, right? Since Iran maybe not to be able to fund them as much anymore, do they become more reckless, right? And so if that takes place, we're just going to have to see. And ultimately that will be, it's just unknown. And so again, any analyst that tells you how this is going to shake out, I mean, we're talking about guys like Sauter, we're talking like there's plenty of Shia militias out there that absolutely have a vote in the region's peace, for a lack of a better term. So we just don't know, and that's okay, right? But it's something to keep an eye on, and in juxtaposition to that is Kuwait, right? So there's border issues right now between both Syria and Iraq, and then Iraq and Kuwait, and we just don't know what's going to happen because you have a lot of decentralized, very angry people, right, that are very upset about what is going on with Iran. And even if they're not sympathetic to Iran, they're very upset about what's going on with Gaza. And this is how power rises, right? We saw this with the rise of ISIS. Do not fool yourselves for a second to believe that this part of the world cannot have another storm of ISIS dawn upon it, right? There are radical leaders with a lot of manpower, with a lot of guns that can absolutely cause a lot of chaos. And then now that, a decapitation kind of situation has happened, and if the IRGC is able to contain them, okay, fine. But even if they contain them, they're going to use them to their own ends and their strategic goals. And so time will tell. Nothing in the MOU really speaks with any type of teeth to what Iran is going or not going to do with its proxies. And this is what's got Israel upset, which is a natural segue. A major contention, and we just saw this come out a couple hours ago, is that Iran is saying that the MOU is already violated because Israel is still striking Lebanon. Right? Why are they striking Lebanon? Because Hezbollah is there, and Israel is already on record saying we are not beholden to this agreement that the United States has with Iran. So again, we don't know. So when you turn on the TV and everybody's got it all figured out, I'm telling you, we have no it don't take much for Arabs and Jews to really start wanting to killing each other, especially in this section of the world, right? It just doesn't. And so acting like we have a predetermined notion of how this is going to play out, to me, is just foolish. It's best just to use some tactical patience and kind of see what happens, right? Because essentially what the POTUS has done is given us some space. Despite how you think about it, right? Whether you believe that this war was a good idea or not, right? He has signaled to the world that we're on pause and we're done with it, and we're ready to try to get back to at least the status quo. The unfortunate thing is I don't believe the status quo is there. Just given the power brokers that are at play, and you're going to have countries that see the opportunity to leverage this to their advantage. And so we'll just see how it shakes out. Turkey just been quiet, right? Absolutely kind of the military arm of what's going on in Syria, right? They fund them, they train them. Syria is looking for an opportunity. Again, president of Syria, we talked about this 2 weeks ago in the White House. This is a former Al Qaeda member, HTS, brutal guy. Very nice watch collection, for lack of a better terms. But anyway, absolutely a terrorist, right? That's been in the White House in the Oval Office. However, he's ruling over a wasteland at this moment. What is Turkey going to do? We don't know, right? We don't know if they're going to see an opportunity to pursue the Kurds again. However unlikely that can, in these kind of moments, is when leaders like we have in Turkey and we have in Syria, and certain factions of Iraq, especially Iran, these guys will seize the opportunity because they believe right now, and I think this is well spread throughout the Arab world, that the U.S. has no appetite to continue this conflict, right? So strategically, we've kind of lost deterrence in that aspect, and I don't say that to offend anybody. To shout out to all my strength, peace through strength people. that works great stateside. Nobody over there cares, right? If you're not shooting and they believe that you are not willing to commit state sanctioned violence, they'll absolutely take the opportunity to do it for you. And that's kind of where we're at there. Um, Israel's in a tough spot. They just are, right? The vice president and the POTUS have both publicly kind of rebuked Netanyahu for his actions. It puts him in a very difficult position stateside, or at least when I say stateside, for his nation. Um, JD Vance signaled that they do have the right to defend themselves, but he didn't personally went after specific members in the cabinet today, saying that essentially they don't, they should appreciate what we did, right? Kind of reminiscent of, it's like what he did to Zelensky in the White House. Have you said thank you lately, right? Well, Israel's not going to say thank you. They're not, right? Because now the MOU doesn't address the ballistic missile program, and they look at Iran in a certain lens, and they have valid reasons to do that, because whoever doesn't believe this, right, Iran will wipe Israel off the face of the earth if they had the opportunity to do it, which was the pretext for why apparently we went to this war. So again, we've talked about it. It's 5D chess. It's extremely messy. But now that we've kind of opened Pandora's box, we're just going to have to see what happens. And so again, as you watch your TV channels, yeah, good luck, right? Because there's some solid analysis out there, but right now, what the mainstream media really is tending to do is just, we're either blaming the POTUS for even doing this, right, and disrupting it, or we're saying this is the greatest thing that's ever happened in the world, and 50 years and all these great things. Good friends of mine who are senior leaders, we kind of talked about this. And it's like, we do think about it as mowing your grass, right? If you're struggling to conceptualize what we actually did, the joint force went over to Iran and we mowed the grass, right? It will grow back. How rapidly that happens to be determined. But they absolutely will grow back, because all we did was cut the grass. Now, we cut it pretty bad and a lot of people died. But again, as you've heard me discuss on the show a lot, these people don't necessarily care about their populations. So whereas losing 30,000 soldiers in American terms would be just god awful, that's like a Tuesday for countries like Iran and Russia. They don't bat an eye, which is a great segue for what Ukraine is doing, right? Again, I'm trying to speed through this, guys, because I don't want to waste your time, and I don't have Nick here to talk, trash to me about what I don't know. So anyway, moving to Ukraine, the POTUS at the G7 absolutely shifted the talking points and the tone of how the West is looking, and Ukraine has had some significant wins recently, even though, and this is a good sign of what information operations and the internet can do. The front line is still a drag out fight. It is an absolute meat grinder. But what we have seen, especially since kind of last year when Zelensky and JD Vance and the POTUS had kind of that, a falling out live on TV in front of the whole world, you have no cards thing, is that we've seen Ukraine over the last year demonstrate that when we take the handcuffs off of them, which post that meaning we kind of did, right? Like, essentially, we've always provided them intel. But in the meantime, what they did is their industrial base now is one of the worldwide leaders in drone production. And they're just getting better and better and better at it. And now they started reaching out and touching Russia. The St. Petersburg, for the strikes that they did at the economic conference that Russia hosted in St. Petersburg were critical. Those were a warning, and now we're seeing the follow-up, because there was talks and backdoor talks about, is Russia going to actually have this conversation right now? Russia indicated it would not, right? And then they hit UNESCO site church right there in Kiev. They struck buildings when we literally had representatives over there in Ukraine. They showed no indication that they were going to stop their kind of mass, what we call in the military spray and pray diplomacy, where they just started sending ballistic missiles and drones in droves at Ukraine. And so Ukraine was then, either whether this was a backdoor deal, nobody knows yet, whether we gave them the go ahead or whether they did it unilaterally. That'll be a key indicator to look at. they started tearing up Moscow. So this morning they blew up a major oil refinery. The video you're seeing online of the oil thing blowing up, that was actually an ADA missile that was shot at a drone, missed, and then hit it. So Russia's blowing up their own stuff right now, which, I'll cry about that later, but it couldn't happen to better people, right? And so now we're getting this pressure now, and I think this plays well domestically because, by all accounts, we've stopped giving Ukraine money, right? Well, Europe is set up. The Netherlands, we just saw a massive report of them, um, with another EU package, and Zelensky's getting way more aggressive in the way he's talking about that Ukraine is the European army. Whether he's in the EU or NATO or not, his talking point now is like, we got this. All I need is a little bit of support, right? And then we also saw open source reporting that he's even reached out to companies, Western companies, and said, I will build your missiles for you, right? If you give me the specs for like things like Patriot missiles and stuff that are industrial or defense industrial complexes now capable of building these components, and we are ready, willing, and able. That is massive. That's extremely significant, and it is absolutely a signal to Russia, right, that this isn't going to go well. And then the strikes inside of Russia are to bring it to the Moscow population, who's absolutely been inundated to this. Look, you can think whatever way you want, but by most open source reporting right now, Russia has lost over 1.2 million soldiers in Ukraine. They're bringing them back by the truckload, right? Some reports of up to 1,000 a day. So while it doesn't make the headlines already all the time, it's extreme significant amount. And just like in America, like everybody knows somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody that served. That's absolutely the case in Russia. Now, while they're conscripts and people like the value of life isn't necessarily the same there, what you're seeing is a pressure being applied. And now with explosions absolutely happening inside of Moscow, you can't ignore it anymore. And typically with Russia, they do not respond well to losing. Right? Most of their upheavals um, have happened right after major wars, right? So you can go back to the Russo-Japanese War, when the Tsar got killed, and you got World War I, and then World War II, they had upheavals, right? And so this embarrassment that is happening culturally plays horribly for Putin inside of Russia. And the oligarchs will eventually get to a decision point where, are we going to keep paying for this thing? Are we going to keep supporting this thing, as we can't walk outside of our mansions inside of Moscow without breathing in oil fumes that have been blown up in a refinery, right? Because ultimately, just like you'll hear me say all the time, when it comes to war, somebody has to go kill somebody. And Russia's been doing everything it can to push the line in Ukraine, and they can't take it. It doesn't matter what you get when he goes down in Anchorage and says, here's the other thing. America can't stop Ukraine now, right? I would argue, and look, I've been a pro Ukraine targeting guy for a while. Like I was very on the record early saying that I thought they could tactically win this war. And I'm telling you, like at this point, with how it is turned, that even if America cut off its intelligence to them, I don't think we can tell them to stop. One, it's their country. They have the right to fight for their land. Let's just be first and foremost with that. But they've went, for all my golfers out there, right? They went and got it out the dirt, right? They have done this with the bare minimum support from us. I understand that it plays well domestically. Really, all we did was give them a bunch of all our old broke stuff, and then just put a dollar amount on it because Biden wanted a headline for how many millions he gave. Um, whether that was actually real or not, right? But winning matters, right? We believe that in the West, and they're winning, right? And if you're one of these people that wants to make yourself feel better and say, well, our tax dollars did it, I'll tell you, okay, we absolutely have supported them in extremely critical ways, but our name carries a lot more weight over there than our actual support that we gave them. Um, and I say that coming from, I think, a place of knowledge. Yes, our intel helps. I got it. Right. They have their own intelligence services. They're literally doing assassinations inside of Moscow of senior Russian leaders. So I think they've become a wartime economy in a wartime country. And I expect absolutely that they'll continue to ball up in depth Russia while they're able to hold the front line. And Russia just doesn't have the command and control structure to actually push through and do anything short of literally dropping a nuclear bomb. Um, that's where they're at because they've done everything short of that. If very early on in that conflict, there was the story that this is Russia's B team and they're going to do this and they're going to do that. In war, guys, you do what you can, right? You play to win. And Russia's done everything it can. It just turns out they're not that good. It'd be like me boxing Muhammad Ali, right? I got my heart's in it. You're gonna get knocked out, and I think that's played out. And feel free to disagree with me in the comments. Sorry, I can't read them, and Nick's not here to drive them up. So, all that being said, I want y'all to look at a couple things real quick. Essentially, the indicators for Iraq, because that's the takeaway over the next couple weeks, right? And now that we wrapped up Ukraine, right? Sauder, let's see what Sauder City, just south of Baghdad, right? Very critical to what he does with this PMF integration, and then KH, and then AAH, and the rest of the PMF. There's a law right now going on in Iraq that essentially says if they're going to move forward, right, and integrate, how that plays out will let you know how strong Iran still is, right? If they were able to rally the Iraqi politicians that are on their payroll and sympathetic to them, that is an indicator that Iran is still diplomatically and still has a strong hold on the region. And since they've lost Syria, they're struggling in Yemen, right? They still have the Houthis, but they're struggling, right? Iraq is absolute, and then Hezbollah is out there on its own, right there in Lebanon, but they're trying to incorporate them into the ceasefire. Um, Absolutely, Iraq is what they have left. And so I fully expect Iran to lean heavily into trying to leverage the support zone they have inside of Iraq to help it get, back its power, right? Look, Nick just called me, of course. He must have just landed. Look, guys, that's all I really have. We'll chop this up for y'all. I'll have the episode recap out. I don't want to bore you, right? I appreciate y'all tuning in. I guess I'll check the chat. I don't even know if anybody can say anything. Nope. Yeah, David Gray, you ain't wrong. Count everything in Nick's office. I appreciate that, man. I hope y'all have a good week. We'll get our shit together. And I think we're gonna have some interesting things to talk about next week. Access of Idiots will make a comeback next week. And I think we'll be able to have a little bit more fidelity on where exactly if this ceasefire even holds, because like I said, tonight Iran is saying that it's no longer, they're signaling it's no longer valid because of the strikes in Israel. Shout out to Luke Ellerbrock. Now I gotta text Chris. Y'all hit me with questions. I'm looking at the chat now. Sorry, I was trying to get through all that. Damn, Nick hit me up. Sorry, I gotta tell this guy to end the show. World Cup tomorrow, right? We got that going on. Sorry, I was late for that. But he's got to close it. All right, it's been real, y'all. I'm about to bounce. He's going to end the show. We'll chop it up next week. And hopefully I'll have my battle buddy back so he can talk, because next week we're going to talk about I guess I'll go ahead and rant about this. The Major Richard Starr Act. Now you've seen the bigger I'm gonna talk trash to him because he's not here. Nick is, and we'll set this debate for next week because he's been annoying me, but I've been letting it happen. Guys, the Major Richard Starr Act and then Take Care of Veterans Act that's going on right now, right? I'll put my VFW hat on. I don't think this is good business. And I'm hopeful that the Major Richard Starr Act, which allows veterans that have CSRC or CDRP to draw both their VA and their retirement concurrently, gets pulled out of this bill and just gets passed clean. Because what we're seeing, and this is what Congress typically does, right? They lump everything together, and it almost becomes, for a lack of a better term, like a suicide pact, right? So right now, what Congress has done by lumping the Major Richard Starr Act with the rest of these, and the major VSOs, like Disabled Vets of America, the VFW, obviously, and some others, they put us in this position where there's this legislation that we have wanted for years, right? The VFW and others have been fighting for this for 7 years to pass the Major Richard Starr Act. And now they're lumping it in with a lot of other bills that absolutely adversely affect veterans. And really, it's a signal to try to privatize it. And so there's this major push to make us, the VSOs, look like we're holding back progress now. There's a discharge petition right now on the floor that would allow, for the Major Richard Starr Act to just pass clean, and they have no interest in doing that. Nick has some thoughts on that. I have some thoughts on that. I am prepared, willing, and able to have this debate with him next week, even though this is, primarily about current events. I think it is a current event for the veterans, and it matters, obviously, to a lot of my friends and our friends in the audience. And I think it's a debate worth having. Hopefully, we'll have more for you on what's actually going to happen with this Iranian conflict, and hopefully, I sincerely mean this. Um, I think, we're all looking for peace here, man. So again, y'all have a good week. It's been real. I did it by myself, Nick. You're no help. I can't fire you because you're the boss. And Chris, if you're around, man, just go ahead and take us out.